Greetings to everyone joining us today. In just a few minutes, we will get started, but first I want to cover some housekeeping items for today's webinar. Everyone has been muted. If you have a question, please ask it in the question window of GoToWebinar. We will try to get every question either individually or aloud during the Q&A session at the end. Once the presentation begins, sometimes people might have some issues seeing the slides advance. If that happens to you, just close the window and then rejoin. That usually fixes things. We are recording today's session and will share the link with you after the webinar. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to today's webinar, Introduction to the MuleSoft Anypoint Platform. Thank you for joining. We're very excited to share this information with you today. I'm Nisha Bakshi, and I'm on the developer marketing team here at Salesforce. Today, we're joined by Renee Winkelmeyer, a principal developer evangelist at Salesforce. He focuses on enterprise integrations, Lightning, and all other cool stuff that you can do with the Salesforce platform. With over 15 years of Java enterprise development under his belt, Renee has been involved in a variety of integration projects across different clouds and on-premises stacks. Next, we have Rashid Tolukder, the developer advocate at MuleSoft, focusing on enterprise integrations in both legacy systems and high-volume distributed IoT data through MuleSoft's Anypoint Platform. Rashid has been coding since the age of 7 across a variety of languages, technologies, and stacks, and believes that APIs are going to enable the next major advancement of humanity. Next slide. Before I begin, just a quick note that when considering future developments, whether by us or with any other solution provider, you should always base your purchasing decisions based on products that are already generally available. Next slide. Please keep the conversation going on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And please use the hashtag SalesforceDevs in your post. Next slide. And since we're doing this presentation with MuleSoft, we can go to the next slide. Yes. Please also make sure to @mention @MuleDev. Next slide. Finally, if you have any questions, feel free to ask questions at any time during the presentation in the question window. We will be answering as many questions as we can live during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. And with that, we're ready to get started with today's session, Introduction to the MuleSoft Anypoint Platform.
Thanks, Nisha, and hi, everyone. So I'm Rashid, and well, I'm pretty sure a lot of you are here because you're just really curious to know and see what MuleSoft can do to really help you improve the customer experience, right? So from a really high-level view, MuleSoft's platform is called Anypoint Platform, and it's basically your one-stop shop for just about anything related to APIs and integrations. So in software development, when we think of integrations, it usually means connecting, let's say, system A to system B, or system A to any n number of systems, or vice versa. And then when we think of APIs as a mechanism for basically exposing data and also functionality both from and to different systems, APIs kind of work as a standardized interface, the I in API, if you will. So now that I just kind of covered that MuleSoft can do APIs integrations, that sounds really great. But I think it's really kind of important to understand and know why we need integration. So let's think about really all the data that's out there in all these different systems, right? I think I read some prediction or whatever that by the year 2020, there would be a bunch of zettabytes of data out there, right? So what's a zettabyte? It's a 1 with 21 zeros behind it, right? A lot of zeros. So you have all this data that exists in these silos of these disparate systems, right? Individual products and data stores that they don't necessarily speak to one another. And so because they don't speak to one another, they don't really help us to either gain or provide more information and in turn a better experience. So an example of this that I think resonates with everyone maybe is a while ago. If you landed at an airport and you needed to get home, and let's say it's some other state, country that you've never been to and you don't know anyone there, and you needed to get around, well, you needed to hail a cab, right? So what did you need to do? Well, first of all, you needed to have cash on hand, right? And if you didn't, you had to first go find an ATM in this place that you don't know. So you had to ask around, look for signage, get an ATM, get cash, and then go outside and hopefully it's not raining. And then you had to wait for a cab that was, approaching you, hopefully at some point, and then make sure that that cab was also available. Lights, it's got a yellow light letting you know that it's available to pick you up. So great. Then you find a cab, you get in, and then you have to tell the driver what your destination is. And you hope that the driver knows how to get to that destination. Either you or the driver knows, right? And then at the very end of the ride, you give cash, and then hopefully there's enough change. And then the driver would have to sit there and write out a paper receipt, right? So that whole entire customer experience today, fast forward 10, 15 years, is completely different. It is leagues and leagues better. And really the best part of it all is that it only takes a few taps of my finger to experience. And really that's the benefit of integration. That's why integration is such a great thing. So what does the current landscape, if you will, of data integration look like today, especially in the context of like a shopping experience, right? So let's say that we're going to start off by spending some time and energy to create a really amazing web store experience, right? We're going to integrate from all these different data sources, marketing automation systems, product information databases, ERP systems, inventory and order fulfillment data stores, and also some sort of analytics and reporting engines to provide us with measurements for how things are going and where we can improve, right? So awesome. We go out, we try to build it out. We're a stellar team of web developers and backend system integrators, and it somehow only took us 3 months to build it, okay? And 3 months later, project's complete, it's rolled out, it looks great, it works great, and now we've got a new demand to create a mobile store that's in parity with the web experience, right? Well, the mobile experience is a completely different platform, right? And it's going to need a few minor tweaks to the actual data structure and et cetera. And also, it's going to be worked on by a completely different team, most likely. Either a team that knows Swift or a team that knows Java and is able to work on Android's platform or whatever other mobile platform there is out there. So it's going to be a different team. And a different team means that they're going to probably use a different set of tools. So because of this, they're either not going to be aware of the assets that the web team had created, or they're not going to be able to use the existing services because the mobile experience, it needs different data types and different structures, and just overall it has different needs, right? So they end up building basically the same experience, but different, all over again from scratch. And this is also another stellar team of developers. So now you've basically tacked on another 3 months of build time to deployment, right? So we're now 6 months in total. And then finally, all this digital experience is going amazing, and we want to bring some of that into the physical store as well. So now we get another different team working across another different set of tools, and they're going to build out another amazing experience at the physical locations, which is going to take another 3 months. So to create a unified experience across these 3 mediums, you're looking at about 9 months to fully roll this out, okay? So first of all, let's address one of the issues, right? And how Anypoint Platform is able to solve it. So because we see all these different teams using different tools, because really there's a sea of different needs, right, for the different parts of the software development lifecycle, MuleSoft's Anypoint Platform, it helps you solve this issue by offering just one complete suite, regardless of where you are in creating these experiences. So whatever phase of the software development lifecycle you are in. So if you're in the design phase, let's say, we've got tools that aid in the designing of the API. For development, we have a runtime and development environment that really allows you to quickly create implementation across different sources, protocols, and data types. We've got management tools and control planes for your APIs and your services that you go ahead and deploy. And then we also have a method of exposing, sharing, and discovering the existing assets to help you avoid duplication as well. And all of this is actually available to you either on cloud, on-premise, or a hybrid cloud environment. Because we offer a single design time and a single runtime, you could even, when you're ready to, switch over and migrate to the cloud with really very minimal effort and change. All right, so that's cool. The problem of people using different tool sets is resolved, and so now let's go on to the next thing, right? So the second issue that we talked about was that each of the teams, they're building these rigid services that really work great for the original needs. But once the requirements changed, right, or a new requirement came in, like when they wanted to add a mobile experience, right, what we end up seeing is that it either takes a lot of effort to refactor existing services, or net new services are created instead. Well, if instead we create some really well thought out, rich APIs with a very transparent contract that people can adhere to, we can actually alleviate a lot of that duplication work by standardizing the interaction model and providing a really easy way to gain access to this data. And that's really the beauty of the modern API. You get a lot of this flexibility, and this flexibility of standardization and access helps to really accelerate your time to market. So what you end up having is you end up going from this to this. So where each of these services are well-documented, flexible, and rich APIs, which helps you provide a really amazing experience across all these different mediums. And all of this is possible thanks to this. The Anypoint Platform is one platform to tackle the entire API lifecycle and accelerate creating a really amazing customer experience in a rapidly shortened time frame. So as we basically create this customer experience with the Anypoint Platform, in today's demo, one of the areas we're going to be using for the webinar is Anypoint Design Center. So Design Center actually has tools within it to both design and develop your APIs. There's a tool in it called API Designer, which allows you to build API specifications in a open source language called, markup language called RAML, and also another tool called Flow Designer, which allows you to create some application logic flows and data transformations, all from within a web interface instead of a IDE on your local machine. And we're actually going to also leverage a few of the hundreds of available pre-built connectors and assets that are available to you in another product called Anypoint Exchange. And what Exchange offers is basically an area to share and discover assets that are made available in a controlled way by an administrator of existing assets. And this helps you really speed up development cycles. And also, you're not just limited to using the pre-built connectors that comes with your Anypoint Platform subscription. You could actually create your own connectors, templates, or examples, and share it within your organization and have it be consumed by other members. So looking at the current landscape, Renee is going to talk about what integration looks like today.
So when you look at what's possible with a Salesforce platform, you have a plethora of options, right? You see that on the screen. Either you talk to the REST API, SOAP API, maybe you write your custom Apex to do callouts to external websites, external APIs, or you want to use platform events for an event-driven architecture. But all that means custom coding. So for example, let's say you want to call an external API when an account object changes. That usually means you have to write a trigger, you have to write HTTP callouts, and you have to make sure that your Apex code is hopefully really well tested. And you have to make sure that all different cases, like for example, the API is not available, is also considered in your code. Now imagine you wouldn't have to take care of that. Now imagine you would have a solution like Anypoint that takes all this development effort off you. And the same is, for example, when you look into platform events. Event-driven architecture is a big thing nowadays, but as you likely figure, the systems that you want to talk to or the systems that you want to consume from for platform events don't talk the platform event specification, which means you have to do some custom coding, like in Ruby, Node, Go, whatever your language is. And with Anypoint Platform as the integration layer between Salesforce and your third-party systems, you don't have to develop. I got recently asked by an admin, can I use Anypoint Platform because I don't know how to code? And I would say, if you understand data, you can use Anypoint Platform. And for that, I think we're all here for a demo. So I give over to Rashid that we can see Anypoint Platform in action.
So let's go ahead and take a look at the platform itself. So after you log in, you're welcome to this home screen over here for the platform itself. And within it, we've got Design Center, like I was talking about earlier. So clicking into it, we're able to basically create two different asset types, either two broad asset types, either API specifications or Mule actual applications. To start off with, we're going to be talking about the design phase of an API. So I've already pre-built this API specification, which has one main endpoint, which is a product by product ID, getting a product by product ID endpoint. And this is all written in the markup language RAML, like I spoke about earlier. And up here we see what security schemas are used by this API, the different data types, as well as the endpoints themselves, what the data type is for the URI parameter that it takes, responses, an example response body, and etc. And we can actually leverage a lot of this for both the implementation of the actual service and for the client side itself. So an example of that is by this. We have this thing called a mocking service, which allows you to have this URL where you basically input a product ID, and you could actually take this URL and put it into a client-side application and test against this mocking service before an actual implementation is done. And what it'll do is it'll actually respond with this example response that we've actually put here in this API specification. Again, without writing any code, just writing a bunch of markup, we're able to basically have a very useful resource like this mocking service over here. And you could try it first within this interface, with this console over here, and it just requires, we're just going to put in some dummy authorization. And as you can see, it actually responds back. It's actually pinging. Once we hit the send button, it actually goes ahead and makes a request with the parameters specified. And what we end up getting back is the example data. And if you can imagine, I'm actually going to go ahead and give this URL to Renee, who's going to basically be able to create a client application using this URL and use it against it.
So what you see here is the standard Service Console in Service Cloud. And as Rashid said before, in standard development projects, you can only start when you have the actual API available, right? So before you can start to develop, you have to wait till everything is set. But now with MuleSoft Anypoint, and especially with the mocking service, which I really like, I only need to wait till Rashid pastes me the URL of the mocking service, they can start, is that I, as a Salesforce developer, that I can now go ahead and actually go into my sandbox or my scratch org and can start developing without waiting for the final implementation, no matter where the databases are from. So what I did here is I'm in the Service Console App Manager, and I created a small Lightning component, product search. And this product search is now configurable so that I can reuse it either in my testing or in my user acceptance test or my production environment. And this has a small little property, which is actually the mocking service URL. So let me just grab that over here from Rashid. Thank you. And I'm going to add that. What's happening here is that the Lightning component grabs the data URL, passes that to an Apex controller, and connects to the MuleSoft mocking service. And the great thing is, I can just go and push that to production, exchange the URL, and have my product up and running, which basically means now I can test actually the API, can go to my product search, enter some data, I get a description back, I get the reviews back. So I'm actually already done on the Salesforce side. I don't have to wait for all the other implementation details. So minimizing the development time, maybe from 6 weeks till I can start to a week till everything is set. And with that, I'm giving to Rashid because he should show you how to grab all this data using MuleSoft.
All right, so now that Renee has already completed the client application before I've ever even created the actual implementation, pretty amazing, using the mocking service, I'm going to, in parallel, create the actual implementation itself. So we'll just say it's the product, I could spell, product experience API, and we're going to just go ahead and start making this product. So starting off, our application itself needs to have a trigger. So what does it mean by, what do I mean by trigger? A trigger is basically what is going to kick off your actual, what is going to kick off your service. This is going to be a event-driven via an HTTP RESTful call. So what we need is a HTTP listener. So we've got the HTTP connector using the listener operation. And the last thing we're going to, here, let me just do this. This is even better. So we've got the HTTP listener. That'll be our trigger. We're going to set a path for this API to the /API/the version number, the main resource category, and then the resource being the product ID, which is a URI parameter, so it's going to have the curly braces. And then we're going to close it, and that's now added to the canvas. So this is Flow Designer. And in Flow Designer, you basically have these cards that you're adding onto the canvas. So we can go ahead and add another card to this canvas over here. And let's say in this scenario, it'll be one of the data sources for what we're creating for our experience, where we're basically creating this API, this product API, this product experience API that has not only product information, but reviews and also who's providing those reviews, all coming from different data sources. So in order to get the main product data, which for this demo purpose exists in a MySQL database, I'm going to go ahead and go into and put in this database connector with a select operation. And then I'm going to go ahead and set that up. And then similarly, I'm going to also have a Mongo connector put onto the canvas with a find documents operation, because this is where all my reviews are set up. And then lastly, the reviews are done by specific users, which I'm going to need Salesforce for. And as you can see here, and Renee's going to talk a little bit about this, we've got a bunch of different connectors.
Right, so there are already ready-made connectors, and when you click on the top, for example, Rashid, the Salesforce connector, these are all actions or events that you can execute in a standard Salesforce org. So if you remember the integrations, the Salesforce integration slide that you saw before the demo, like calling REST API, creating objects, invoking Apex REST methods, all that is accessible right here using a visual interface. So there's no code needed if you want to react or act on any of those things in the Salesforce org, which makes it really, really easy to integrate. And as you can see here in this flow, it can be part of a complete application or data transfer, right? So data from MongoDB, mix it up with metadata from a Salesforce org and expose that as a result in JSON or XML for a target service, for example. This is just an excerpt. There are also connectors available, for example, for Einstein Analytics, for Commerce Cloud, and also for Marketing Cloud. And that, I would say, for you, Rashid.
So for our purpose, we're going to use the retrieve operation against the Salesforce's SOAP API to get some customer data. So these are our three different data sources. Again, we've got a MySQL database, a Mongo database, and Salesforce. Each of them are going to provide unique pieces of information, data, that we're going to go ahead and put together to finish our contract for the API. So in order to do that, we're going to need to configure each one of these connectors. So for the MySQL database, I'm going to click this card over here. And the first thing you do is set up a global configuration. So I just need to go in here, go to MySQL connection, and then for host, I'm just going to put in all the configuration values that it needs in order to actually authenticate itself and be able to access the data that we need. And I'm just going to fill these in, and then after all that's put together, I'm going to go ahead and upload the JDBC driver that I have for a MySQL database. And the nice thing is that this is a database connector, so that means that any JDBC driver that you have for an assortment of different databases can be used. So if you've got Postgres or Redis or whatever, as long as you've got the driver for it, which can be downloaded from any vendor or from a Maven repo, you can then go ahead and upload it and use it within your project, which gives you a lot of flexibility. All right, so now everything's configured and ready to go. We can then go ahead and hit the test button and verify that all the credentials and parameters are correct for it to authenticate itself and connect to the database. And we get a little test successful message right here. Great. So the global configuration for our database connector is done. So now what we need to do is then actually configure the query that we want to run to get the right fields and the right amount of the right data from our MySQL database. So I'm going to just go ahead and set a few things. And what I'm doing here is basically creating these input parameters that I can then use in my query, which helps to avoid SQL injection attacks. So now I've got a pretty common join SQL query that I'm going to run, which is just going to go ahead and get the product data that I need via the product ID. I'm referencing a variable over here, but I need to declare this variable first called product ID. So now that this whole connector is completely configured, I'm actually going to go back here and create a variable, set variable. And we're going to call this product ID, which is going to have the value of the URI parameter, which is the argument which is the argument that you want to use to actually reference the product ID later on within your flows, such as in the database connector. So product ID, and close that. And then basically we're going to continue this pattern of configuring each of the connectors one after another. Now, to save a bit of time, and because for the Salesforce connector I have to kind of show you my secrets, and I don't want to do that, I actually have a pre-canned one ready to go, and I'm going to go ahead and show what it kind of looks like. So we've got the HTTP listener, which is what kicks off and triggers your flow to trigger this application to run. I'm setting this variable product ID, which just references the URI parameter that it grabs from the HTTP listener, since that has the variable product ID, which I then use in my database connector for my SQL query to get the product by product ID. And then I'm getting, I'm running a Mongo query for product reviews by the product ID as well. And then in the reviews are users, user IDs for their reviews. So then I have to go into Salesforce and query via the user IDs that I have in here into Salesforce. And then this is where really the magic happens. This box right here, this card, which is not popping up. There we go. This card right here is the data transformer card. And what it uses is this proprietary language called DataWeave to go ahead and do all sorts of different data mapping and data transformations. So what we have on the left-hand side over here is all the incoming data, which I've set as different variables. So right off the bat, we've got contacts, which is coming from Salesforce, product ID, which was coming from the HTTP connector that we set as a global variable, or sorry, not anyway, and then we've got reviews for that ID and all the different fields that we get from the MySQL database. And I can go ahead and aggregate all of that, and and combine all that into a data structure that I need to adhere to the API specification that I had originally created. And I can do one-to-one mappings for anything that makes sense for one-to-one mappings. And then if there are more complicated data transformations that need to happen, I could go into script mode over here and actually create and actually run this functional in this functional language called data weave to actually transform the data however I need to. So I'm getting an error over here, which you'll have to excuse me, but what I'm doing is this variable reviews for ID that I have set is actually an array. So I'm performing a map of each of the items in reviews for ID, and I'm assigning it using an anonymous function and aggregating the user IDs and assigning them to the reviews to fit the data model that we have. So normally there would be a preview pane and you'd be able to see this, but there's just a little bit of a bug over here. But anyway, so like I said, you can either do a visual one-to-one mapping, or if you need to do more intensive data transformations, you could actually go in here and perform functional coding to actually transform your data as you need to. So after all this flow is created and done, it's already running, so I can actually grab the URL that's provided for me, copy that, and then paste that onto here. And we could actually see what the data looks like because it's going to return back as a JSON. So as you can see, this is the data, and I could change the ID, and it'll query different products and whatnot. So you can see it's actually performing queries through the MySQL database, through the Mongo database, through Salesforce, aggregating all that data together, transforming it using data weave, and then outputting it as the JSON that fits my API specification. And it needs to fit the API specification, and this is so critical because while I was creating this, Renee was creating that client application, that Lightning app that you saw at the same time. So that contract needs to match on both ends because he's creating the client side that's going to match. I need to create an implementation that matches. And that's why the API specification is so important. So now I can go ahead and take this URL, give it to Renee, and he can go ahead and paste it into his Lightning app. And it'll basically just switch over from that mocking service that you saw to the actual implementation without having to have any delays because we're both able to create both the client and the server in parallel. So Renee.
So if you look back at the slide that we showed before the demo, and you see all the different integration options that you have, be it either through various APIs or using platform events or using Salesforce Connect and external objects, for example, right? Those are all things where you nowadays have to rely on custom coding, which is time consuming. And I'm, as a hardcore developer, sometimes it's also boring if you have to write an integration every second week for the same API or for the same event. But if we proceed on the next slide, and you will remember all the different connectors that Rashid showed during the flow builder, you will see that you can use Anypoint Platform to actually talk to all the different integration options that you have with your Salesforce org. And which means no custom coding and much faster time to market, which is really important in the agile world of development that we have nowadays. And it also frees the resources that you have as a developer and also for your companies from all those repeating tasks. Because nowadays you have mostly point-to-point integrations, right? You write an Apex call out to a specific API. And in 2 weeks, you have to write a trigger for another external API. With MuleSoft Anypoint, you just don't have to do that. You can use the mechanisms of Anypoint Platform to create those integrations via a user interface, a visual interface, and you can focus as a developer on other parts of your organizational needs for custom development, which is honestly, in my opinion, much more important, because Anypoint Platform frees you from doing that. And I think now we are open for Q&A.
Yep, let's get started with our first question. Are there any trailheads planned to be released for MuleSoft?
Yeah, we are planning to release a few shortly, right before Dreamforce, and we can be pretty sure that there will be more after Dreamforce. Also, MuleSoft has on developer.mulesoft.com a lot of quick starts and 101s where developers can get hands-on and try MuleSoft Anypoint Platform.
Great, thanks. Was the Webinar Product X API written from scratch, or was it developed using the drag and drop functionality that exists in MuleSoft?
So if that is referring to the API specification, that was actually all written from scratch. So here, let me go back really quick, show what I was talking about, what I am talking about. So this is the API specification, and this is basically, in the design phase, this was all written from scratch. But a lot of the components, such as the data types, can actually be reused. You can actually go ahead and upload these data types as individual assets, and also the examples and et cetera, so that they can be shared and reused later on. And then for the actual implementation, what you saw with the cards, they can actually be, you're creating the implementation using existing assets, such as the connectors that you saw. But within this API specification, you can basically export out so many of these individual parts where this lengthy thing can actually look like just a few lines of RAML, and everything else is just being imported as modules.
And Rashid, speaking of RAML, can you explain the difference between RAML and Swagger?
Yeah, so basically RAML is similar but different. So Swagger is incredibly human readable. It serves the purpose of being much more documentation heavy, whereas RAML, which is basically written in YAML format, is both readable by machine and by humans. So it has kind of like a multi-purpose use case. Now, the other thing too is that the API designer tool that you saw, you can actually import in a Swagger or OAS specification, and it'll actually convert that into a RAML specification. And a lot of times you don't even need to change it. It'll work kind of out of the box without needing to have any modifications.
Got it. And how about integrating MuleSoft with Box REST APIs? Do you have any other connectors that are available to authenticate with Box?
Absolutely. And I'm really glad that question's asked, because now I get to show this other part of the platform called Exchange that I mentioned earlier, where you can actually see all the different assets that are available to you. And I can go ahead and search for Box, and I can see all the different connectors and the different assets that are available to me for these different vendors. So Box is right here for both Mule version 3 and Mule version 4.
Cool. You mentioned Flow Designer, which seems to be an online IDE. Where does the source of these solutions get stored?
So when you build an application in Flow Designer, it's actually stored up in the cloud, but you can then go ahead and download it as a jar file. And there's another tool called Studio, Anypoint Studio, which is an Eclipse-based tool, and you could actually import the jar file into there and basically develop on it even further than the capabilities of flow design.
Great. Can you show which connectors you have for Heroku Postgres? Do you have data replication preset flows?
So, sorry.
Go ahead.
Rashid?
Go ahead.
Okay, so as you saw in the demonstration, Rashid used the database connector, and this is a generic connector which will also work with Postgres. So you only have to provide the JDBC driver for Postgres, and you can use a generic database driver for that, and then connect to Heroku or any other Postgres database.
Right, and to add on to that, in the demo you saw the Mongo database. The Mongo database is actually being hosted in Heroku, and we're actually connecting to that, and we're just using the out-of-the-box MongoDB connector. But the MongoDB connector is also basically the database connector with the JDBC driver built into it.
Great. And this question is for Rashid. A previous slide mentioned MuleSoft could interact with on-prem data sources. Is the MuleSoft software able to be installed on-prem, or do we have to open up our firewall to give it access?
So you could actually install a lot of what you saw on-premise. It's kind of like a new offering that we have now. And then that's what I was saying too. You can go ahead and take these different planes and actually, when you want to migrate over to the cloud, let's say, which is very, typical as like future planning, you can do that as well.
And for Renee, does the card-based interface allow for any data manipulation within those cards, or are they just used to show connections and order of operations?
They absolutely allow for data manipulation. And that's what you saw in the demo, the data weave example, where Rashid used the transform card to map data from different data sources to the desired output to the RAML specification. And there are also other options available, like here, there are cards for choices. So if you want to have a flow with an if-else in there, based on a value, it should either execute action A or call API B. You can also implement that within interface.
Right, so this is the choice connector, which actually allows you to perform a decision-based logic for what you're going to do or not do. Similarly, and so there are some cards that are strictly for retrieving or sending data, and then there is the data weave card, which is for data transformations.
Great. And this question came up a few times. How would you recommend a Salesforce admin proceed in learning MuleSoft who have expressed interest in developing end-to-end integrations?
So in our, right now in our slide deck right here, sorry. We've got a free trial. It's a 30-day free trial where basically it's pretty fully unencumbered. You can try any part of the platform pretty much for 30 days. There are guides and a lot of materials out there to help you get started and allow you to learn the platform.
Great. And any pro tips that you might have, Renee, on that?
Just jump on that. It's really not hard. You need to invest likely 1 or 2 full days, and you need a bit of background in data and understanding how data works and flows. And most of that is configuration.
Great. And this question is for Renee. Is there a visual builder, helper, or wizard for RAML?
Yes, and you have that also in Anypoint Platform, which you're just switching to, which is awesome. You can build your APIs either directly in RAML, or you can use the new visual editor that they provide. So Rashid is just doing that, you can create, and then you can actually build your API specification using a UI. So be it either the resources that you want to provide, like is it /fetch and a parameter, what is the response value, what is the protocol, what kind of media type gets returned. All of those things are, as you can see here in the middle of the screen, are available in the visual editor. And on the right side, you see how the RAML is actually generated by that. And this is why I said previously, it's really not hard to start off that. You don't have to be a hardcore developer. And it's really approachable for admins to start with that when they have a basic API understanding.
That's great. And Renee, how does authorization work between Salesforce and MuleSoft?
So you have different options, and you can define that in the flow. Like you saw in the setup, when Rashid set up the SQL database, where we added the jar file, in the same way, you add for a flow step a Salesforce configuration. And in that configuration, you can decide if you either want to use basic authorization with username, password, and security token, or if you want to use OAuth authentication with JWT or username, password. You have a plethora of options to use one of those things, dependent on your company needs.
Great. And this question is for Rashid. Does MuleSoft support import of Swagger APIs? If so, what versions are supported? Can Swagger maps be used to define in the format payloads?
That's a really good question. So question one, can Anypoint Platform be able to import Swagger specifications? The answer to that is yes. Which versions? So that answer is currently, I definitely need to look that up more specifically. But I know that going forward, RAML and OAS are both part of the Open API initiative now. So I think going forward, there's going to be a lot more compatibility in the future rather than backwards.
Great. And one more question for you is, can integration be between non-Salesforce systems to non-Salesforce systems?
Yes, absolutely. So in the demo, I showed the MySQL database and Mongo, and then Salesforce. The Salesforce part was optional. If that wasn't there, I could be retrieving files from let's say MySQL and pushing it to a Mongo database or Redis or any other source. I could go from some ERP system into MySQL. It doesn't have to be Salesforce to Salesforce or something to Salesforce.
Excellent. Renee, we have a Dreamforce question. Do we have any MuleSoft sessions happening at Dreamforce this year?
Yes, absolutely. We have a lot of sessions around MuleSoft in general, MuleSoft Anypoint, as well as Salesforce integration, for example, in the integration zone or in the developer forest. So they're not scheduled yet, as far as I know, but stay tuned because Agenda Builder will be out soon. And then you can bookmark my breakout around MuleSoft and Anypoint Platform.
Great. And I think we have time for one more question. Can versions of platform artifacts be managed and deployed from Git?
Okay. So you can use your existing CI/CD processes and workflows to actually kick off, and you can maintain whatever versions and use whatever version control mechanism you want, and be able to upload your applications and deploy them to Cloud Hub or wherever you choose to. There are platform APIs that are available that enables this as well.
Got it. Thank you so much. Okay, well, it looks like we're almost out of time. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you everyone for joining us today. If we did not get to your specific question, please reach out to us in the forum at developer.salesforce.com/forum. We hope you attend more of our webinars in the future, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.